Hi, I'm Hillary Holzenbach, and welcome to episode 135 of Art This Week. In this episode, we speak with Ged Quinn about his work on view as part of the Focus series at The Modern. Now for Art This Week.
Hi, I'm Rosanna Vargas Forbes here at the Modern Art Museum in Fort Worth, speaking with Ged Quinn on his Focus series here at the museum. Thank you for talking with us.
That's a pleasure.
I would definitely like to start off by asking you to tell us about the pieces that are in the Focus series today.
Yeah. Well, there are three large landscape paintings and a series of small still lifes. They deal with themes of romanticism, utopian ideas, failed utopian philosophies. They are full of narrative, but not necessarily linear narrative.
You reference in your paintings history, art history, mythology. How do you come up with those narratives?
Well, the idea for me was I always use found appropriated landscape images that I think that are understood in a historical sense, so that in a sense it gives you an intellectual space to work within, but it also orchestrates some more contemporary ideas. So there's a layering going on there. So for instance, like if you use Claude Lorraine, you have his vision of Arcadia, which he would use as a setting for say biblical narratives or the landscape that gods would inhabit. And I think if then you introduce other elements that are more contemporary, say to do with 20th century politics, or I think it undercuts them and maybe presents a new context for some of those conversations.
Speaking of, like you said, Claude Lorraine, these are based on some Renaissance pieces, I believe, and so why don't we frame them? That's the first thing we noticed when we walked in.
Well, they are consciously different. I mean, although the imagery is appropriated, it isn't a straight copy. So one of the methods I use to recontextualize the idea is scale. So they have a larger scale than necessary, but it has to be limited just as a painter, in that there's a meta language going on that it would fall apart if it was too large. So they have a more panoramic scale than the original paintings would, which they're probably double or maybe treble the size. I don't know, I just see them as, I just don't consider framing as a necessary element to these things, because I think all the information, all the conceptual content is actually within the image. Framing was a mediation in galleries between the artwork and the room and the space, and for my work it isn't really a relevant component.
One of the other things that I've found in your large scale paintings, your landscapes, is the use of telling a story through those narratives. How do you approach the story, or is it the story that likes you, or do you like the story? How do you come to it?
Well, it's probably partly both. I mean, I think, say for instance, this painting, it's based on a painting by Asher Brown Durant, who's an American Hudson River School painter. And I think he was creating a sense of the American wilderness, of something that had been unseen. And it intrigued me, an American vision of the forest, because I've been looking at a lot of European visions of forest. And I think, in their mythology, they were quite different. So in here, there are lots of strands of lots of symbols of romanticism. I mean, there are monuments here to do with memory. This angular monument is designed by Walter Gropius, which is to the March Dead, which you sort of wouldn't expect to find in the forest floor. And then there's a communist era structure which also symbolized, memorialized where there was a mass grave from the 1940s. And again, these things, since the collapse of communism, have become forgotten and neglected, and their symbolism is being forgotten. And again, it's that theme really of things, even recently, becoming archaeological fragments, and the memory being quite dissolved. I quite like inexplicable, impossible images. For instance, this is an image of romantic death that's imagined by. It represented originally the death of the poet Thomas Chatterton, but in fact there was no portrait of Thomas Chatterton. Nobody knew what he looked like, but there's a very famous painting of it imagined. But then again, there are modernist elements in here, like the sort of the Henry Moore, Barbara Hepworth pierced interior, and filmic qualities too. And then say these, this is like a Malevich painting, like his trousers are made from a Malevich painting. So there's a collapsing of always this, I think this collapsing of romanticism and modernism, and really where they might meet.
What about the pieces about the still lifes you have here?
Okay.
I love those, and I think they're really interesting, and from what I understand, they are based on World War II bunkers?
Yeah, that's right. Right. Bunkers were all taken from a project that the French philosopher Paul Virilio developed between about 1958 and the early 60s. And he saw these things in a dual way, as they were actually a boundary, but also an obstruction, because he grew up seeing them, and they blocked access to the sea. Whereas really their design was to actually prevent access from the sea. So we saw these in both ways. My interest in them is that they're is their scale, their permanence, the fact that they conflate this sort of military architecture. But I've always been interested in the kind of the vanitas sort of painting from 17th, 16th century.
And why did you use food as the medium?
Well, really, I think it's because it was almost as an extreme contrast as you could have. These things are so big, permanent, their whole philosophy and ethos was about power, was about structure, permanence, and food, again, when you relate it to 17th century still lifes, it's about the transience of things, but trying to actually capture a moment, trying to preserve. So I thought artistically there was an interesting thing in that painting food, you were actually preserving it, so that there was no decomposition as well. So there was a sort of a conceptual link there between these things which had actually been built and something which had been painted, to have that link.
And why did you choose those particular locations or those particular bunkers? Was it this architecture?
Yeah, I think culturally they were very interesting. I think because they were almost obsolete before. Well, they were almost obsolete at the time they were constructed. And again, it's a strand of my work, is ideas that become obsolete, ideas that fade, symbolism that fades into the past and becomes meaningless, or its meaning changes, because at the time these were built, they weren't really considering war from the air, so they were really only built to combat from ground level.
want to thank Ged for speaking with us. His work will be on view through June 17th. More information on the exhibition in the museum can be found at modern.org. Thanks for watching.
I still got your Polaroid.